Are you lost, Grandpa? The voice was sharp. It was young. It sliced through the low, electric hum of the dry dock. Samuel Vance did not turn. He did not even flinch. His eyes remained fixed on the hull of the beast, the USS Chimera, a name whispered with awe in the halls of the Pentagon, a shadow that moved beneath the world's oceans. It was the newest, the deadliest, the most advanced hunter-killer submarine ever conceived by man. And something was wrong with it. He could feel it, a faint, almost imperceptible vibration thrumming up through the thick soles of his worn work boots. It was a song he knew, a discordant note in a symphony of perfect, deadly engineering. "Hey, I'm talking to you." The voice was closer now, laced with the impatience of youth and the unearned authority of a fresh uniform. Samuel slowly lowered the pushbroom he held. The bristles scraped against the polished concrete of the pier, a sound like sighing. He turned, his movements deliberate, economized by 80 years of life. Before him stood a lieutenant, junior grade, by the single silver bar on his collar. The man's face was a mask of controlled frustration, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning Samuel's simple gray janitor's uniform with open disdain. "This is a restricted area," the lieutenant snapped. "Tier 1 security. What are you doing here?" Samuel's gaze was calm. His eyes, pale blue and webbed with wrinkles, held a stillness that seemed to absorb the younger man's frantic energy. "Sweeping," he said. His voice was quiet, a low rasp of disuse. The lieutenant, whose name tag read Cale, let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Sweeping. Right. The most advanced warship on the planet is having a full systems diagnostic, and you're sweeping." Cale gestured with a crisp, angry motion at the submarine. Its black, silent mass loomed over them, absorbing the stark white light of the enclosed dock. Wires and cables snaked from its hull like technological veins, feeding data to a bank of monitors where other uniformed figures stood in tense clusters. "We have a diagnostic anomaly in the primary coolant loop," Cale said, speaking as if to a child. "We've been chasing it for 6 hours. The Admiral wants answers yesterday. The last thing I need is a janitor wandering into the kill zone." Samuel's gaze drifted back to the Chimera. His eyes settled on a small, unassuming access panel just aft of the sail. Panel C7. He knew its designation without looking at the stenciled markings. He knew the 36 bolts that held it in place, the exact torque required for each one, and the delicate fiber optic relays that lay just beneath its skin. "The problem isn't in the software," Samuel said, his voice still a quiet murmur. Cale stiffened. His condescension curdled into outright hostility. "Excuse me? What did you just say?" "It's mechanical," Samuel continued, his focus entirely on the hull. "A bearing. In the primary pump. You have a harmonic imbalance. I can feel it." A silence fell. It was heavy and suffocating. Cale stared at the old man. He stared at the stooped shoulders, the liver-spotted hands gripping the handle of the broom, the faded name tag that simply read Vance. "You can feel it," Cale repeated, his voice dripping with venomous sarcasm. "Right? Of course. You, the janitor, can feel the subatomic vibrations through your orthopedic shoes." He took a step closer, invading the old man's space. "Let me see your clearance." Now, Samuel did not move. He simply looked at the lieutenant. There was no fear in his eyes, no anger. There was something else, something that looked unervingly like pity. This infuriated Cale more than any argument could have. "ID. Now, or I'll have you thrown in the brig for the next 50 years, he shouted, his voice echoing in the vast, cavernous space. Several technicians at the monitor banks glanced over, their faces a mixture of curiosity and annoyance at the disturbance. Slowly, methodically, Samuel reached into the pocket of his coveralls and produced a simple, laminated card. He handed it to Cale. Cale snatched it. His eyes scanned the card. "Vance, Samuel. Contractor. Custodial Services. Level 2 clearance." "Level 2. Cale scoffed, waving the card in the old man's face. "This gets you into the mess hall, old-timer. Not within breathing distance of a nuclear reactor. Who is your supervisor? I'm going to have your job for this." "He is busy," Samuel said simply. "I'll bet he is," Cale sneered. He was about to continue his tirade when he noticed it. A thin leather cord disappearing into the collar of Samuel's uniform. Acting on pure, arrogant impulse, Cale reached out. He hooked a finger under the cord and yanked. Out came a strange object. It was a piece of metal, tarnished brass by the look of it, no bigger than his thumb. It was oddly shaped, with a hook on one end and a flat, notched blade on the other. It looked like a piece of junk, something a child might find in a gutter. "What's this?" Cale sneered, holding the object up. It dangled from the cord, spinning slowly in the harsh light. "A magic wand. Your secret diagnostic tool." He flicked it with his finger. The metal made a dull, tinny sound. The moment Cale's finger touched the brass, the world shifted for Samuel Vance. The low hum of the dry dock faded. The sterile smell of ozone and filtered air was replaced by the stench of burning insulation, salt, and fear. The steady white lights dissolved into the frantic, blood-red glow of emergency alarms. He was not 80. He was 30. He was not on a pier. He was 2,000 feet beneath the waves in the engine room of the USS Triton, a submarine that existed now only in classified archives. The scream of dying machinery was deafening. The deck plates were hot enough to melt boot soles. A young ensign was shouting, his voice cracking with terror. "The control rods are jammed. The reactor's going critical." He remembered the heat. The suffocating, pressing heat that promised a death of steam and atoms. He remembered grabbing a spare pipe fitting, a wrench, and a blowtorch. He remembered forging this exact shape in his hands, his flesh searing against the glowing metal, creating the only tool in the world that could bypass the fused relay. He remembered plunging it into the control panel, the world dissolving into a white flash and excruciating pain. He remembered silence. The beautiful, blessed silence of a crisis averted. "I said, what is this thing?" Cale's voice pulled him back. Back to the dry dock. Back to his 80-year-old body. Samuel looked at the young lieutenant, and for the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed his face. It was a deep, profound sadness. From a distance, Chief Warrant Officer Davies watched the exchange. He was a man who had spent 25 years in the submarine service. He was old enough to have seen arrogance sink ships and humility save them. He did not like Lieutenant Cale. The man was book-smart, but possessed zero instinct. He treated the enlisted technicians like faulty components, not men. Davies had been watching the old janitor for an hour. There was something odd about him. He didn't just sweep. He moved with a quiet purpose. He would pause, stand perfectly still, and listen. It was the posture of a seasoned sonar man, not a custodian. When Cale physically accosted the old man, something in Davies snapped. "You didn't put your hands on an elder, not on his watch." He started walking over, ready to intervene, when he saw the name on the ID badge in Cale's hand. Vance. The name snagged on a thread of memory. A story he'd heard as a young seaman. A ghost story told in the hushed confines of the mess deck. A legend about a civilian engineer, a phantom who would appear on doomed submarines and fix the unfixable. They called him the Shepherd. It was a ridiculous sea story, a myth. But the old man's stillness, the way he looked at the Chimera not as a machine, but as a living thing. Davies changed course. He walked briskly to a secure communication panel on the far wall, his back to the confrontation. He keyed in a number he had not dialed in over a decade. The line was picked up on the first ring. "Admiral Thorne's office." "This is Chief Warrant Officer Davies on the Chimera Pier," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I need to speak with the Admiral. It's an emergency." The Admiral is in a secure brief with the Secretary of the Navy. The aide's voice was dismissive. "He can't be disturbed." "You need to disturb him," Davies insisted. "There is a situation here. A civilian contractor is being detained by Lieutenant Cale." "A contractor?" The aide sounded annoyed. "Chief, the Admiral doesn't handle personnel disputes with janitors." Davies took a breath. "His name is Vance. Samuel Vance." A beat of silence. Then another. The silence stretched, growing heavier and more profound with each passing second. It was not the silence of a deadline. It was the silence of utter, world-stopping shock. When the aide spoke again, his voice was completely different. It was tight, strained, and stripped of all bureaucratic nonchalance. "Say that name again, Chief." "Vance," Davies repeated. "Samuel Vance. He's an old man. He carries a strange brass tool on a cord around his neck." A sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Davies could hear muffled, frantic shouting in the background. He heard the words, "Sir, you need to hear this." He heard the scrape of a chair. Then a new voice came on the line. A voice that radiated power and command even through the compressed audio of the phone. It was Rear Admiral Thorne. "Chief, this is Thorne. Report." "Now, sir," Davies said, his own voice now tight with adrenaline. "Lieutenant Cale he's confronting Mr. Vance. He's being disrespectful." He put his hands on him. The silence that followed was colder and deadlier than the one before. "I am 5 minutes out," Admiral Thorne said, his voice a low, lethal whisper. "Keep that man on the pier. Do not let him out of your sight. And Chief, you keep that lieutenant away from him. Is that understood?" "Understood, sir," Davies replied. "Perfectly," the Admiral added, and the line went dead. Davies turned. Cale was still mocking the old man, holding the brass tool up for the other technicians to see. "Look at this, boys. We've been using million-dollar oscilloscopes, and all we needed was Grandpa's dowsing rod." A few of the younger technicians snickered nervously. The older ones just looked at the floor. They knew better. Davies started walking toward them, his face set like granite. He did not run. A chief warrant officer never runs. He walks with purpose. But he was too late. Cale, in a final act of supreme arrogance, unclipped the leather cord from the brass tool. "I think I'll hang on to this. Evidence. For your security violation hearing." He pocketed the small brass key. Samuel Vance looked at him. The sadness in his eyes was gone. It was replaced by something else. An emptiness. A void. "That," the old man said, his voice barely a whisper but somehow cutting through the entire dock, "is a mistake." Before Cale could reply, a sound began to build from the entrance to the dry dock. It was the sound of powerful engines and the tortured squeal of tires on pavement. Every head turned. A convoy of 3 black SUVs, lights flashing but sirens silent, screamed onto the pier. They slid to a halt in a perfectly synchronized maneuver just yards from the submarine's bow. The doors flew open before the vehicles had even stopped rocking. Marines in full combat gear emerged, forming a cordon. They moved with a lethal efficiency that made the base security guards look like statues. Then, from the lead vehicle, a man emerged. He was tall and lean, his uniform a constellation of ribbons and stars. Rear Admiral Thorne. His face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. His eyes, like chips of ice, scanned the scene, bypassing everyone. The Marines, the technicians, Lieutenant Cale, and locking onto the stooped figure of the old man in the janitor's uniform. Cale was frozen in shock. He fumbled to compose himself, to snap a salute. "Admiral, sir." Lieutenant Cale reporting. "We have the situation under control." Admiral Thorne did not even look at him. He strode past Cale as if he were a piece of furniture, his polished shoes clicking with terrifying purpose on the concrete. His entire command staff, captains and commanders, scrambled to keep up, their faces pale and worried. The entire pier, a place of constant noise and movement, had fallen utterly silent. The only sound was the click of the Admiral's shoes. He walked directly to Samuel Vance. He stopped precisely 3 feet in front of him. For a moment, the two men just looked at each other. The Admiral in his perfect, decorated uniform, a man who commanded fleets. The janitor in his worn, gray coveralls, a man who held a broom. Then, Admiral Thorne's back went ramrod straight. His hand snapped up to his brow in a salute so sharp, so perfect, it seemed to cut the air. It was not the perfunctory salute an admiral gives a lieutenant. It was the profound, reverent salute a warrior gives to a king. "Mr. Vance," the Admiral's voice boomed, echoing in the stunned silence. "It is an honor, sir." Samuel Vance gave a slow, tired nod. "Admiral." Thorne held the salute for a long, painful moment before slowly lowering his hand. He then turned, not to Cale, but to the assembled crowd of technicians, engineers, and security personnel who were staring, mouths agape. "You people are wondering what you are looking at," Thorne began, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the vast space. "You think you see a janitor. You think you see a confused old man who wandered into the wrong place." He shook his head slowly. "You are wrong. You are looking at a monument. You are in the presence of a legend." He pointed a rigid finger at Samuel. "This is Mr. Samuel Vance. He does not have a rank, because no rank we could offer him would be high enough. He is not a contractor. He is a consultant to the entire United States Navy submarine force. His clearance level is above mine. It is above the Secretary of the Navy's. His designation is Shepherd 1. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Shepherd 1. The mythical engineer. The ghost in the machine. Every person there had heard the stories. No one believed they were real. 30 years ago, Thorne continued, his voice ringing with emotion. When I was a terrified young ensign on the Triton, our reactor went into a full scram. The control systems fused. The backup systems failed. We were 30 seconds from a catastrophic meltdown that would have vaporized us and the entire carrier group sailing above. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The entire engineering staff, men with doctorates and decades of experience, were trying to solve it with textbooks and protocols. They were failing. Then this man, he gestured to Samuel again, walked out of the radio room where he had been airlifted in mid-voyage. He forged a tool out of a spare pipe and a wrench. He walked through a wall of heat that was melting steel and manually bypassed a relay that wasn't even on the schematics. He saved 3,000 lives that day. Thorne's icy gaze finally fell upon Lieutenant Cale, who looked as though he had been turned to stone. He did not ask for a medal, Thorne said, his voice dropping to a quiet, lethal register. He refused it. He did not ask for a promotion. He did not ask for fame. He asked for one thing, to be left alone and to be allowed to walk among his creations, to listen to them, to make sure they were safe. The Admiral took a slow step toward Cale. He has forgotten more about reactor physics than you will ever learn, Lieutenant. That faint vibration he felt? That is the signature of a hairline fracture in the primary coolant pump's casing, an anomaly so small that your multi-million-dollar sensors were programmed to ignore it as background noise. In 3 days, it would have sheared off and sent this entire boat into an emergency shutdown. At flank speed, it might have caused a full-blown catastrophe. Thorne stopped directly in front of the young officer. He was no longer shouting. His voice was a bare whisper, and it was more terrifying than any roar. You did not just disrespect an elder, Lieutenant. You did not just harass a civilian. You stood in the heart of the temple, and you spat on the altar. You mistook greatness for infirmity. You saw a lifetime of sacrifice and wisdom, and you called it Grandpa. He held out his hand. Give it to me. Cale stared at him, uncomprehending. Sir, the tool, Thorne hissed. The piece of junk you confiscated. Give it to me. Now. Cale's face went white. His hands trembled as he fumbled in his pocket. He pulled out the small, tarnished brass key and placed it in the Admiral's outstretched palm as if it were a venomous snake. Thorne took the object and held it with a reverence usually reserved for a holy relic. He turned back to Samuel Vance. Mr. Vance, he said, his voice thick with emotion. On behalf of the United States Navy, I apologize for the unforgivable ignorance you have been shown today. He held out the tool. But before Samuel could take it, he raised a hand. He is young, Admiral, Samuel said, his quiet voice cutting through the tension. He knows the rules, but he does not yet know the music. He looked directly at Cale, and the pity was back in his eyes. The book can teach you how a machine works. It cannot teach you how it feels. You have to listen. The grace of the old man's words seemed to break something in Cale. The arrogance shattered. The pride dissolved. His face crumpled, and for the first time, he looked his age, a young, scared man who had made a terrible, terrible mistake. I am sorry, sir, he stammered, his voice choked. I didn't know. That, Admiral Thorne said coldly, is the entire problem. He turned to his aide. Commander, as of this moment, Lieutenant Cale and his entire diagnostic team are relieved of duty. They are all assigned to a new, mandatory training course. It will cover naval history, professional courtesy, and the fundamental difference between arrogance and confidence. We will call it the Vance Protocol. He looked back at Cale. You will be the first student, and you will not see the inside of a submarine again until you can tell me the story of every single man who has died in their service. The Admiral then gently placed the brass tool back into Samuel Vance's hand. Samuel closed his fingers around the familiar shape. He slid the leather cord back over his head, tucking the tool away beneath his shirt, back into its rightful place. Thank you, Admiral, he said. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe there is a bearing that requires my attention. And he turned, picked up his broom, and shuffled slowly toward panel C7, leaving an admiral, a disgraced lieutenant, and an entire pier of stunned personnel in his wake. Months passed. Lieutenant Kale was no longer a lieutenant. He was just Kale, an ensign. He had been demoted, but not discharged. The admiral had been clear. This was not a punishment, but an education. He had spent 3 months in a classroom, learning the history he had so arrogantly ignored. He read about the heroes of the silent service, men who fought and died in darkness, their sacrifices known only to a select few. He studied the schematics of older submarines, marveling at the ingenuity born of desperation. He learned the story of the Shepherd. He learned about the Triton, the Scorpion, the Thresher. He learned the names and faces of the men whose lives were owed to the quiet man he had insulted. His arrogance was gone, burned away by the harsh light of his own ignorance. It was replaced by a deep, aching humility. He understood now. He was beginning to hear the music. One rainy Tuesday, he was sitting in a small, greasy spoon diner miles from the naval base. It was the kind of place that had not changed in 50 years. He was nursing a cup of coffee, staring out at the rain-streaked window. The bell above the door jingled. An old man in a simple plaid shirt and worn trousers walked in, shaking the rain from a battered hat. He took a seat at the counter, 2 stools down from Kale. It was Samuel Vance. Kale's heart hammered in his chest. His coffee cup rattled in its saucer. He wanted to run. He wanted to disappear. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on him. But he remembered the lessons. He remembered the faces of the sailors in the old photographs. He remembered the admiral's cold, disappointed eyes. He took a deep breath. He stood up. He walked over to the old man. Samuel looked up from his menu, his pale blue eyes showing no surprise, as if he had been expecting him. "Mr. Vance," Kale said, his voice quiet and steady. "Sir." Samuel nodded. "Ensign." "I wanted to apologize," Kale said, the words feeling small and inadequate. "Properly. For my behavior. For my ignorance. There is no excuse for it. I was arrogant and I was wrong. I am truly sorry." He stood there, braced for dismissal, for anger, for anything. Samuel Vance looked at him for a long moment. He then gestured to the empty stool beside him. "Sit down, son. Have a piece of pie. The apple is good here." Kale, stunned, slowly sat down. They sat in silence for a few minutes. The only sounds were the clatter of cutlery from the kitchen and the drumming of the rain against the window. "You know," Samuel said finally, his gaze distant, "the hardest part of building something new isn't the metal. It isn't the wiring or the math." He turned his calm, wise eyes on Kale. "It's remembering the ghosts of the old things. Every machine has a soul. It's made of the triumphs and the failures of everything that came before it. You can't command the machine until you've learned to respect its ancestors." He offered a small, thin smile. "The books can give you the knowledge. Life gives you the wisdom. Looks like you're finally starting on the second part of your education." A waitress came over, and Samuel ordered 2 slices of apple pie. He slid one over to the humbled young officer. And in the quiet of a roadside diner, under the patient gaze of a living legend, the lesson was finally, completely learned.